Condemnation continues to fall on Israel over its military strike on refugees sheltering in tents in the Gaza Strip. The number killed continues to rise, along with the anger of Palestinians who are still trapped inside the city of Rafah. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made an announcement in Hebrew to say the strike was on refugees in Rafah was a tragic accident. Nonetheless, it's the latest Israeli strike on the city. Once again, the United States is now urging Israel to take every precaution to protect civilians. Devastating images are emerging from Rafah, from the scene where at least 45 people have been killed. And many of these images are just too shocking and disturbing to be shown on our screens. But they represent the reality the Palestinian refugees are facing right now. The death toll is over 36,000 across the Gaza Strip since October the 7th. Let's take a look at our report.
The strike took place in an area of western Rafah that Israel had designated a safe zone. On Monday, survivors searched amongst the burnt structures of tents. Dozens were killed or injured late Sunday night when fire tore through the camp of displaced Palestinians.
We had just finished praying and we were putting our children to bed. There was nothing unusual. Then we heard a very loud noise and fire erupted around us.
The occupation told us that this area is safe and that we could stay here because it is a safe zone. We set up our tents and stayed. But there is no safe area here in the Gaza Strip. We were targeted, they killed our children and burned our women and elders inside the so-called safe zone. This is the 7th time we have been displaced in the Gaza Strip.
Many in the camp had recently fled the eastern areas of Rafah, where Israeli forces began a ground offensive earlier this month. Israel said Sunday's air attack killed 2 senior Hamas officials in a Hamas compound with, quote, precise ammunition and on the basis of precise intelligence.
A fire broke out after the attack, which appears to have taken civilian lives. Civilian casualties are desperately sad, but this is the war Hamas wanted.
But the strike has drawn international condemnation, with Egypt describing it as the deliberate bombing of displaced people and a blatant violation of international law. Mediator Qatar said the attack could hinder truce efforts, which have been at a stalemate since earlier this month when Israel entered Rafah. The French president said he was outraged by the strikes and called for an immediate ceasefire. And the EU's foreign policy chief said Israel must abide by the International Court of Justice's ruling last Friday to immediately end its Rafah offensive.
Emerald Maxwell with that report. Let's bring in our guest, Dr. H.A. Hellyer, Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Dr. Hellyer, thanks for being with us here for Apropos on France 24. We appreciate your time. Benjamin Netanyahu has, in a sense, apologised. Maybe that's too strong from my perspective. At least he said the words, it was a tragic accident. Do those words ring hollow in your view?
So I'm not sure what sort of accident it is when you launch a strike on an incredibly densely populated area where refugees that have been forced to move maybe 5-6 times over the past 7 months. I don't know what sort of accident that is. It's inevitable that when you strike any sort of area like that with such artillery, then civilians are going to die, and they're going to die in very large numbers. But unfortunately, this isn't the first time that we've seen Israeli forces carry out this sort of attack. As you said in your report, tens of thousands have been killed over the past 7 months, coming up to 8 months now. And unfortunately, we expect more such attacks to take place with more of a civilian death toll, unless the Israelis are forced to stop their aggression against the Gaza Strip.
It's worth pointing out to people watching that what happened in Rafah followed a similar strike on Jabalia in Gaza City the day before. So clearly, as you're saying, Dr. Hellyer, there's a real pattern here which we've observed since October the 7th. The United States as well has repeatedly said to Israel and to Benjamin Netanyahu personally that they should take all the care possible to make sure civilians do not get hit. And once again, here we are discussing civilians being killed.
So Joe Biden said that there was a red line when it came to Rafah, and the day he pronounced the red line, there were already strikes that took place that day. There were strikes that took place the day after, and there have been strikes pretty much every day since then. The red line has been crossed multiple times to the point where it's rather pointless to speak of a red line. And even after today, the White House is unwilling to come out and say that the red line has been crossed. All of this to stop American law, which is very clear on the fact that if a foreign power uses American weaponry in a way that does not meet obligations laid out in international law and American law, then those arms transfers have to be stopped. And the White House persists in being unwilling to identify that indeed that line has been crossed and that arms must stop.
On October the 7th, Dr. Hellyer, I think it's fair to say that there was lots of sympathy with Israel because of what Hamas did. And no one can say that it was anything but a sequence of atrocities, the killing of 1,200, mostly civilians, and of course the kidnapping of some 250 people taken back into the Gaza Strip. But since then, the balance of atrocity has changed, has it not? Do you think that that change in international opinion is going to be something that will force Israel at some point to reassess what it's doing?
So within a few days, I think, of the initial retaliatory strikes of the Israelis back in October, that 1,200 number was exceeded. And, we're talking now of 20, 30 times more that number that have been killed. So yes, the balance in terms of numbers, and it's really poor of us to speak of numbers in this way, but unfortunately that's where we're at. I think that the balance of killing has really been shifted tremendously, and as a result, international public opinion swung really against Israel very early on. I think you had a great deal of sympathy and empathy for the Israelis as a result of the attack on October 7th. I think that's pretty much gone, with the exception of leadership in the United States and a few Western countries, but not even in popular opinion in those countries. In the United States, for example, which is Israel's most stalwart ally, public opinion is generally behind the ceasefire. So I think that what we've seen over the last few months is a real test of the rules-based international order underpinned by international law, where the United States, Germany, and a few other countries that could really make a difference in terms of how Israel behaves has been unwilling to place the rules-based order above these considerations of solidarity with an ally, even when the ally breaks international law, even when the ally is on the dock at the International Court of Justice for genocide charges, even when the ally is probably going to be served with warrants for its prime minister and defense minister by the International Criminal Court for war crimes. So I think that we operate at a time when the rules-based order is really being questioned. The world is watching and seeing this unfold on their television screens and wondering, is there such a thing as the rules-based international order? Or is there really one set of rules for allies of the United States and one set of rules for everybody else?
We can't show the images that we've had come into France 24 of what's happened because they are shocking. And we don't want to distress people by seeing it. On one level, something is saying to me we should show them because that's the reality of what people are living on a day-to-day basis, and that is horrific. But let's go back to the quotation from our report. We saw a gentleman there who was in the camp saying there's no safe zone now at all. And it's the 7th time they've been moved. Each time they've had to move because they get bombed again, and again. You mentioned the arrest warrants that are being called for by the ICC, by Karim Khan, the chief prosecutor, for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, and also, of course, for the Hamas leadership. Will this give, in the eyes of the international community, greater credence for this call for Netanyahu to be a subject of an international arrest warrant?
So I should stress here, the International Criminal Court is an independent court. It does not move according to public opinion, international or otherwise. It moves, one would hope, according to the evidence. And the prosecutor has made it very clear that the reason why he called for these warrants to be issued is on the basis of evidence that he has gathered. So I fully expect that those warrants will be issued, but it won't be because of public opinion. It shouldn't be about public opinion. It should be about the evidence. The same thing with the ICJ. The ICJ is gathering evidence or being presented with evidence. It's not being presented with opinion polls. And I think it's quite extraordinary that we're interpreting, not yourself, of course, but that we're interpreting the actions of the ICC or the ICJ as somehow some kind of anti-Israel crusade, as some are attributing to it. It's not the case. These are courts of law. The ICJ is the highest court in the world. The ICC is the inheritor to the Nuremberg courts. I mean, this is really quite extraordinary that we exist at a time where a country is in the dock for genocide charges at the ICJ, where arrest warrants are being called for because of war crimes, and we don't have a clear policy from the countries that really could make a difference to ensure that this war stops, that the war crimes that are being investigated cease, and that we find ourselves in a political process that can bring some sort of relief to the people of Gaza and end, I must add, this cycle of escalation that could plunge the region into a war that would be horrific for all involved, including the Israelis.
It's about getting to the truth, and one day that truth, let's hope, it will set us all free. Dr. H.A. Hellyer of the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on France 24 in Apropos. We appreciate your time and your analysis. Dr. H.A. Hellyer there of the Royal United Services Institute. That's it for this Apropos segment. Do stay with us, though. We have much more to come.